Happy Friday the 13th. Today on Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the Mezco Cinema of Fear Series 2, and this is Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Jason Lives is arguably my favorite Friday the 13th movie. It's kind of the one that I think had the best blend of comedy and still had some gory kills, but it was a lot of fun, plus it had Alice Cooper stuff in it, which is always kind of a soft spot for me, so the movie was kind of just made for me to love it, I think. This is the second Jason Voorhees figure I got, and it's the first Mezco Jason Voorhees figure I got. I picked it up at a Spencer's. I want to say it was on clearance at the time, which is kind of ironic, seeing that on the secondary market, this figure soared up to astronomical numbers. It went up to about 10 times the price that it originally went for on eBay. And I gotta say, when I saw those numbers, I was glad I'd gotten one off the shelf. Jason comes with a ton of accessories, which is another reason why I love the early Mezco Cinema of Fear line. They just came with so much stuff. So here we have his spear, but it's really a fence post from the cemetery. It's pretty darn nice. I mean, the main part of it is just a black plastic shaft. There is some kind of mud work on it. The head of it is rusty or muddy. I can't really tell which. It's kind of, the ornate shape that it was in the movie. Coming onto the bottom, it actually looks like a welded chunk at the bottom, kind of like it would have been welded onto the fence post before Jason broke it off. So another nice detail piece on it. The only downside to it is kind of big. I mean, if we bring the figure in next to it, it's about as tall as the figure himself, so he is a little clunky and takes a lot of room to display him with this accessory correctly, and shelf space, for me at least, is a premium. Next up, we have the trademark of any Jason figure. We have his machete. This one is nice and bloody. I always kind of like the Mezco machetes because they didn't feel too fragile, so you weren't really afraid of breaking them. But they did have a nice shape to it. It's got a good splash of blood on it. My biggest complaint is that it doesn't look like the blood has any real direction to it. It's all just kind of like dabbed on there. Looks like it was done more with a paintbrush than with somebody's own body. The handle's nice. You got some rivets in there. It's not the most movie-accurate machete you'll get, but it is a very nice representation of what it needs to be. The machete fits in Jason's hand quite nicely, which is really good. I hate it when accessories don't fit. And I gotta say, normally I don't put each accessory into the hand of a figure when I'm describing it, but with Jason, I almost feel like I need to. I love putting him in his hand, and I never can find which accessory I want to pose him with at the time. I always kind of cycle my Jasons through their weapons. Next up, we have the hunting knife. Another nice accessory. You can see it's got a good plunge of blood. I do like how the blood's done on this one. It has a serrated edge up at the top. The shape isn't entirely right for a hunting knife, and I think it's a little on the large side. But it's kind of cool. I like that we have it, even though it was for a pretty quick kill. Honestly, this is one accessory I rarely ever pose him with. He does hold it nicely, just like the other stuff. It just isn't as impressive to have him holding the knife. One complaint I really do have that would be really cool is if you could put it into his belt somehow. I mean, he has this big pouch here. It really does seem like you should be able to stick it behind there or something. It's too long to start off with, but, maybe they could have shortened the blade down and had it fit in here or something like that. It would have been really cool to have him be able to pull out the knife like he does in the movie. And now that we're done with his weapons, let's move on to his other accessories. This Jason has a ton of stuff. He comes with a heart that he rips out from the kid at the beginning of the movie with Tommy. Oh, it's a cool thing to see Jason just plunge his hand into someone's chest and rip their heart out. It's a decent looking little heart. There's not really much to say about it. They ended up reusing the same thing for the Part 9 Jason, the Jason Goes to Hell Jason. They just darkened it up a bit. It's a decent heart. You can use it for pretty much any figure you wanted to, honestly. I guess that is the good part about it. He comes with the severed arm of the paintball player, which has got a bunch of blood on it. It's got the camo sleeve. It's cut off there at the elbow. Another cool accessory. The really neat thing is you could take this, and it will actually hold the machete. And even though it's very hard to do, and I'm not going to waste my time doing it for this review, it'll actually sit in his hand if you get it in there right. So you actually hold the arm with the machete, which is kind of cool. He also comes with Sissy's decapitated head. Some nice blood and gore down there, all the hair, poofed up, totally 80s style. My big complaint about this accessory, though it is pretty well detailed and everything, is that The skin tone seems a little off. I believe the actress had a little darker complexion than this, and it's just not quite right to me. It's a little orangey and a little not quite what it should be. But still, cool to have a severed head to put next to Jason either way. And last, but certainly not least, is the Jason Voorhees Headstone. A lot of my love for the early Cinema of Fear stuff comes from accessories like this. All the figures just had these big, gigantic, cool accessories to go with them. And I loved it. It's what made me fall in love with the line, honestly. And this is one of those things that's just cool. It's got Jason Voorhees on it. It's all cracked and messed up. You got the grassy bottom to it. It's just great set decoration, basically. You have not just a figure on your shelf, but you have his grave. You have all these other parts. And I love that you could almost just build a diorama out of what came with the figure. Really, really cool. And by the way, there is nothing really on the back, but it is still well detailed. And I think that's been the longest it's ever taken me on one of these outside-the-box reviews to cover just accessories on a figure, because he really did come with a lot. But getting into the figure itself, I think it's a pretty good representation of the character. Mezco has always kind of had their own style to things, but the earlier Cinema of Fear figures weren't as stylized as they eventually became. When it got down to probably the last two series 3 and 4, a lot of the work got really, really stylized. Here, I think it's still pretty accurate to the movie. We have his green work shirt type thing, we have a bunch of little bullet hole details, and lots of fabric movement and stuff going on here, all the buttons detailed down there. There's an undershirt. You have his gloves, his gardening gloves that he wore in that movie. His brown pants, all tattered up at the bottom over his boots. Turn around. We have his utility belt. All the rivets, I think, are really nicely detailed. The pouch here, which I still really wish would hold that knife, but what are you going to do about that? But lots of rips and tears. I think there could have been a little better paint done inside of the rips and tears to give it a darker appearance. It is kind of lacking in that respect. Also, there's areas, especially back here on the arm, where you could see the green that was probably the base color they painted this upper body really is there a little too strongly. It's just a very, very bright green. And the shirt wouldn't have been that bright, honestly. It's more of this olive anyway, and there's darkness added to it, but this is way too bright. You can see back here, we can see bits and pieces of Jason's head around the mask. The mask itself is another area where I have problems. The mask isn't the right shape. It's totally deformed. It comes out really far over here and comes up, and then it has more of an angle over here, and it's really just all messed up. It's not right. The coloration on it's good. It's got the rivets in the corner and the 3 straps, the brown straps that are accurate to this movie. I think it's the only movie he has brown straps on there. Missing the side chevrons. I think that's also movie accurate, but he's got the one on top. Now, you can't really see Jason's eyes through the mask. The mask kind of fits on his head a little weird. You can see through this eye hole is his dead eye. And I think his good eye is actually below the eye line on this one. So there's really no way to get his eye to show through in the mask, and that would have been a good detail to include. Despite my problems with the shape of the mask, in profile it actually is okay looking. It does have a pretty good shape, but dead on, it's very obviously the wrong shape. Now, of course, the mask is removable. It's a little hard to get off, but you can pop it off there. It almost has like a bite plate in here that's meant to sit in Jason's mouth. You can see the figure has an open mouth, but I've seen a lot of people have issues with it and end up having the mask sit about here. And I've heard a lot of complaints that it doesn't sit down all the way. And granted, like this, his eye does line up with the hole, but I really don't think this is how it was intended to be worn by the manufacturers. It just is way too much of a gap. I really think the way that I had it before, and the way I always put the mask on, is to get that piece in his mouth and then kind of rotate the straps back over. But the face underneath is okay. In part 6, we don't really get a very good look at Jason, so it's kind of left up to interpretation. This isn't my favorite interpretation by far, but it's not bad. He's got like the drooping mouth over here, the nasty teeth. I do like that he has an open mouth. His nose is eroding away. He's got the one good eye and the one maggot food eye. I guess it's supposed to be like the spider webs and stuff in there. I think there even is like a little spider on his cheek. But it's a little too white to be spidery, and also he has the other bone pieces sticking out that are the same color. So it actually just looks like he has little chicken bones in his eye socket, which is a little annoying. But the rest of the color I do like, the kind of grayish brown skin tone they gave him. He's got his ears, both the ears pretty much intact, and he's got the two slices in his head, the one from part 4, that would be the eye continuing down the side, and then the one from part 3, that's the top of the head. Both of those look pretty good, and even have some of the bone from the eyebrow sticking out over here. Another wound back here in the back of the head. Another one, too. I mean, there's a lot of good damage done to him on this figure. I have seen, as I mentioned before, some better interpretations of the look, but from the very brief scene we get of Jason Unmasked in that movie, this is fine, it's serviceable, and you really can't argue with it all that much because there isn't really much to go by. For articulation, he has a ball joint at the base of the neck, so he gets a pretty good range of motion. You could turn the head side to side, up and down, all that good stuff. He has a pin socket shoulder, so it comes out to about here. You can get a full 360 rotation there. There's no rotation in the upper arm or anything like that, but he can bend at the elbow. Unfortunately, it kind of limits where his arm can be. You really can't get any rotation for the forearm or anything like that. It's kind of pre-posed. You can rotate and bend at the wrist. Both are a little hindered by the glove. Rotation not too bad, but the bend, obviously you cannot bend backwards with the glove on there. And he has a ball-jointed waist, which gives you a pretty good range of motion, though you don't have a lot of turning ability. It's more backwards and forwards. From the waist down, he is a statue. I know there are a lot of collectors out there that don't like this trend with horror figures, but honestly, the ones I have with leg articulation are always the ones that fall down, so I really can't complain all that much about him having pre-posed legs. Overall, I really do enjoy this figure. He's one of the first entries in my horror collection, which has since grown to epic proportions. So you could say this is one of the pieces that really did start my addiction to horror figures. I think he's really cool, and I'm definitely going to recommend him. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, he does go for quite a bit on the secondary market, so your options to get one may be kind of limited or kind of expensive. Since we do have 3 Friday the 13th this year, I did pick this figure specifically for this one because the first Friday the 13th this year, I wasn't sure exactly what NECA was going to put out at Toy Fair, so I picked one they'd already done. And it turns out they're going to be putting out a Part 3 and a Part 4, so hopefully those might be out by the next Friday the 13th and I can do a figure wars with them. But I'm really surprised that NECA has no plans, at least announced, to remake this guy. As I mentioned, he goes for so much on the secondary market, it seems like it would be very sensible for them to say we're going to do Part 4 and Part 6, the 2 really expensive Mezco figures, redo them and make them in that new awesome NECA styling. And granted, I am satisfied with this figure. I think especially even with the new NECA figures coming out, this guy still looks good next to him. He's still not cartoony enough like so many Mezco releases that he does fit in with a more photorealistic horror collection. But I just really don't understand why this isn't being taken up in a more immediate sense. I really think NECA would benefit by looking into this guy. Though I would also like to see them do about 7 more figures before him, but still. For other fans who don't have the chance to get their hands on him, I think this guy should definitely be redone. Not because there's anything really all that wrong with the figure, even though there are some minor gripes that I have, but mostly just because of the fact that he's hard to get. And I think more people should have the opportunity to have a Part 6 Jason. So, having said that, have a good Friday the 13th. Try not to get slaughtered at any campsites by any lakes. And if you survive, I'll see you next time here on Outside the Box Reviews.